will be required, we will endeavor to dig this up from our storage, because actually, Mr. Chairman, this has been more than 10 years. So, but we will as requested.
Thank you, Mr. Tirona. I think,
Mr. Chairman, let me clarify. Is the statement you are unable because of COVID or because you need time to look into the documents, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Herbosa, can you reply, respond? Mr. Tirona?
Let me clarify, Mr. Chairman. Actually, we need time to dig up on the files, because these have been more than 10 years ago already, and some of these files are in the storage. So we have to research whether these files are still available for submission to the committee. It would be best, Mr. Chairman, if we also understand what documents are needed by the committee, and we will pursue to submit it, Mr. Chairman.
Yan number kay si Joshua na yung tawag niya. Mas well versed naman si Joshua, hindi mo konsultan kay nako.
The amended SPB Act, or from May 15, 2006 to May 14, 2008. What are the responsibilities of the Commission or SEC in the implementation of the SPB Act? Under the SPB Act, the Commission is responsible for the following: registration of SPB corporations and processing of applications and issuance of COEs to institutions and transactions under its regulatory authority who are qualified for tax benefits and other privileges under the SPB Act. There is also performance of the Commission with respect to aforementioned responsibilities are as follows. On the registration of SPB corporations, the Commission was able to register a total of 61 SPB corporations. With respect to the processing of applications and issuance of COEs, Out of 61 registered SPV corporations, 20 SPV corporations representing 33% were issued with COE, whereas 41% or 67% did not apply for the benefits. From 2004 up to 2013, a total of 723 COEs were issued by the Commission to applicant SPV corporation. The said issued COEs covered a total of 31.2 billion worth of non-performing assets. Likewise, the SEC is responsible for the registration of unit investment trusts to be issued by the SPVs. However, the Commission did not receive any application for registration thereof. With respect to the issuance of the certificate of eligibilities over DBP's transfer of non-performing loans to SPVs, the Commission respectfully informs the committee that the transaction on the alleged condonation or write-off of loans made by DBP in favor of companies controlled and affiliated with Lopez family, such as Benpres Holdings Corporation, now Lopez Holdings Corporation, through the SPV law or otherwise, did not pass through the SEC. While the SEC approved the incorporation of the SPVs where said loan portfolios were allegedly transferred, it had no involvement in the transfer, condonation, nor write-off of the loans. It is noted that the BSP is the appropriate regulatory authority for banks, from which the NPLs in subject investigation originated. The BSP has the authority to issue the COA covering the subject NPLs from DBP, if any, under the SPV law. Thus, the Commission defers to the comments of the BSP in relation to the alleged condonation of loans by the DBP, the former having been designated by the SPV law in its IRR to have the sole authority for issuance of COAs to banks. Nonetheless, the Commission reiterates its support in the current investigation and will provide available information and/or documents as may be requested by this honorable committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Emmanuel.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Honorable Defensor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, I'd just like to clarify. We are now in investigation in need of legislation.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Have we already taken the oath of the resource persons, Mr. Chairman?
After the preliminary statement, before the interpellation, we will get we will
Thank you,
have
Mr.
them sworn in, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Honorable Defensor. Next, to give their opening statement, any representative of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas? Yes, Attorney Kobe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I am Mean Kobe, Director from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, and I am not a lawyer, sir. But anyway, may I briefly articulate the comments of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas relative to House Resolution number 1040. Section 143 of the Manual of Regulations for Banks sets forth the guidelines on credit risk management to ensure that financial institutions, such as DBP, have adequate and effective comprehensive credit risk management system. The guidelines articulate sound principles and practices that shall be embedded in the credit risk management framework of financial institutions, including writing off of problem credits, which must be approved by the Board of Directors in accordance with defined policies and shall incorporate well-defined criteria under which credit exposure may be written off. Thus, under Section 143 of the Manual of Regulations for Banks, banks can write off credits that are meant to be worthless as defined in their written policies. Meanwhile, only the write-off of problem credit accommodations to directors, officers, stockholders, and their related interests require prior BSP approval. So other than that, there is no prior BSP approval required. In addition, banks are required to have in place policies that define and establish the reasonable period of time within which to write off loans already classified as loss. Further, there shall be no undue delay in implementing write-offs to ensure that banks' capital level is reflective of its true state. Based on available records of the BSP, there is no information on loan condonation or write-offs by DBP of the accounts belonging to Benpres Holding Corporations. Nevertheless, we note that DBP is a government financial institution, thus transactions may be verified likewise with the Commission on Audit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney Kube. May I ask the BSP can be reminded that we request that we submit a position paper regarding House Resolution 1040 within the next week.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes,
Thank you,
we shall
thank you.
be submitting. Thank you.
May we recognize the members of the House that are in the Nograles Hall. Representative Bong Suntay, and via Zoom, Representative Cesar Jimenez Jr., Deputy Speaker Christine Singson Mian, Representative Wilton Co, Representative Presley De Jesus, Vice Chair David J. Suarez, and Representative Argel Kabatbat. We will now, before we move on to the interpellation phase of our hearing, may I request the COMSEC to swear in our resource persons online and here on Nograles Hall.
As our guests to please stand and raise your right hand. This also applies to those representatives or resource persons participating via Zoom. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this congressional inquiry, so help you God? Thank you.
Thank you. You may sit down. We will now entertain questions or clarifications from our members. May I remind that members to limit their questions to the issues presented in the resolution and refrain from asking questions already answered. We will recognize interpollators on a first to register basis, and please register with the committee secretary, or in Zoom, please use the chat app. And you are limited to 20 minutes, including the answer. If this is insufficient, there will be a second round to ask questions after all members have initially completed their questions. Pinapaalalanan ko rin po ang ating mga membro na panawahuin na panalitiin ang maayos at disiplina sa pagdinig na ito, and always address the chairman when asking question and answering to the question. First to register is Representative Dindi Bautista. Honorable Bautista, you are recognized for your questions.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning again to everyone. Just have a few clarificatory questions, and I'll make it a very short one as well. I'd just like to manifest if we can also request a representative or a position paper or any document coming from the SPV group, and we can study their documents for the next hearing regarding this matter, and also the contracts with DBP covering the loans of the Lopez Group, Mr. Chairman. Also, as from what I understand, we can have an SPV as long as there is a corporate rehabilitation or a restructuring. So I just like to ask also from the Lopez Group Holdings, if they can submit a copy of the corporate rehabilitation plans of Maynilad Water, because from what I gather from information, they went through a corporate rehabilitation last 2003 with Maynilad Water. Bayantel rehabilitation was in 2004, and Central CATV, the loan was restructured in 2004. So I would just like to ask for a copy of the corporate rehabilitation plan and the decision for this, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Study, Mr. Chair, for this hearing.
Thank you, Honorable Bautista. May we request first the first part of the question of Honorable Bautista, the Development Bank, to please respond. Honorable Bautista, can you repeat the question for DBP?
I don't have a question for DBP, Mr. Chair. I would just like to ask if they can provide us with any document coming from the SPV, because of course we know that the SPV was the one who bought the NPLs from DBP. So if there is any document that we can please this.
Soraya Adjong, can you provide documents to the committee? Any documents on the SPV?
Mr. Chair, with respect to the loan agreements, all of these have been transferred to the SPV, which is Philippine Investment 1 and Philippine Investment 2.
Yeah, but I heard that as of now, as of today, these companies no longer operate. Is that true?
Based on my knowledge, they still exist and operate.
Can
Mr.
we
Chair.
invite? Can you give the address of these two companies so that we can coordinate with them or invite them?
Yes, sir. We can.
PD1 and PD2.
Yes, sir. We can submit the details that
Yeah,
we have
contact
on file.
details.
We can submit it to the secretariat after.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you, sir.
Attorney.
Mr. Chairman, just a
Yes.
quick interjection. DBP, are you saying now that you do not have any of the loan agreements? While you have given it to the SPV, you should have in your custody the loan agreements existing as regards to the SPVs or the loans that you have given to the SPVs.
Mr. Chair, pursuant to the asset sale and purchase agreement, we are to turn over all documents to the special purpose vehicle to allow them to go after the borrowers.
Of course,
Yes, sir.
but you should have the copies of those loan agreements because even that you submit to the BSP for eligibility. Is that not correct, BSP? So are you telling us now that none of those loan agreements, even the private banks, not DBP, who have given themselves or given documents to the special purpose vehicle, have in their custody even copies of the loan agreement? Sinabi niyo wala na?
We regret po that we have already turned over, and even if there are still remaining files, these files have already been destroyed, Your Honor, in accordance with the retention policy of the bank.
Sure. I think there's something wrong because I have seen some of those loan agreements. And I think DBP is not sure, or at least the representatives here are not aware of what they're saying.
Mr. Chairman.
Honorable Bong Suntay, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I agree with the observation of the Congressman Mike Defensor. I also do not buy the reasoning being given. These are these loan documents cover a substantial amount, and it is very hard to believe that DBP would not keep a copy of said loan documents for themselves. Saying that it was turned over and whatever was left was burned is truly hard to accept, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Honorable Deputy Speaker Herrera, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask, ano po yung retention policy ng inyong banko?
With respect to loan agreements, we keep this on file for 5 years after the loan is fully paid. Then after which we store it for 5 more years so that at the end of the 10th year, these files are destroyed in accordance with policy.
Wala man lang pong nakalagay doon. Sorry, kung 10 years ago, medyo high-tech naman na tayo. Hindi, wala po sa policy na you put it on archive, sa files, I mean sa USB or I mean sa files ninyo sa computer. Wala po ba doon sa retention policy na gano'n? Because I think 10 years ago, medyo high-tech naman na yung bansa natin.
It's actually po what's in the policy is in fact to destroy after 10 years.
Can you submit to us that bank policy for the record of the committee?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Chair, we will do that.
It's an internal policy of the bank. Meron bang law na pinagbasihan yon?
It's in accordance with the National Archive policy, Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker. But the actual implementation is left for the bank to, the specific policy is for the bank to adopt.
Yes, dun sa National Archive policy, I don't know, I haven't gone over it. Does it say 5 years also, or was that a decision of DBP, Mr. Chair?
It's an internal policy of the bank, Mr. Chair.
Ano yung nasa National Archive policy, if you're aware, so that we just know para alam namin kung ano rin gagawin namin dito.
We have to refer to the provision of the law, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Can you get back to us before the next hearing?
We will do so, Chair.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chair.
May we now ask the
Mr. Chair, sorry. Just a quick, Mr. Chair. Just to give you the power
yes.
in the future, Mr. Chair, may I move to use the provisions of the powers of this committee to allow you to subpoena documents
Yes.
for legal purposes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I so move, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Honorable Defensor, I think we should first ask them in a formal way first. We give them, this is the first hearing. They have not been given yet a reasonable time to provide. So we first give them a reasonable time to provide, and in the next hearing, maybe you can present that motion.
Mr. Chair, kung yun po ang inyong desisyon, wala akong problema. Ang pinagtataka ko lang kasi, Mr. Chair, alam nyo, maraming nanonood ng inyong committee hearing, marami yung nakikinig ngayon. Tapos yung mismong ahensya na iniimbestigas natin kung saan nanggaling yung loan, sinasabi, wala nang dokumento.
Yes.
Medyo hindi yung maganda yun at nakakatakot.
I agree, Honorable Defensor.
Considering, Mr. Chairman, na hindi ho to privado eh. This concerns a bank, financial institution owned by the government. Pagka po pala may naging anomalya, naging problema, under the law, even if it's beyond 10 years, pwede ho nating i-retrieve eh. Pwede ho makuha ng gobyerno mali. Pero sa sitwasyon po natin ngayon, but good thing, I know for a fact that there are documents around para ho tungkol dito sa isyong to. Pero yun, Mr. Chair, I leave the wisdom to you. When you need that power, we have that power to subpoena.
Yes,
So-
I am aware of that.
Yes,
power.
so we can also, Mr. Chair, maybe, hopefully, in fact, ask the law enforcement agencies to assist you in retrieving these documents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable Defensor. Maybe on Zoom, may we ask the President for his commitment of DBP, President Herbosa, to provide the documents on the SPV and all related documents on this loan agreements with the Lopez Group and Press Group. Mr. Herbosa, do I have your commitment to provide within the next 1 month?
Mr. Chair, ever since the time that this was chaired by His Honorable Franz Alvarado, we have been cooperating in giving you all that we have. I would just like to recall to this committee that we're talking about 20 years. And I think I would advise everybody to look into the National Archive law. To keep documents, every single document of 20 years is an impossibility. I would just like to make that statement. And I think that's the reason why we have that law under National Archives. Thank you very much. Please trust our 100% cooperation on this one to the best that we can and reasonably can. Thank you.
Thank you, but we are still reiterating our request that within 1 month, you provide the documents that you have on this transaction so that the committee can do its work, Mr. Herbosa. Do we
Yes,
have
sir,
an understanding on that?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman. We try to do the best we can and even to deliver even before the deadline.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Honorable Defensor.
Mr. Herbosa.
Mr. Herbosa, please.
Yes, sir.
Opo.
Yes, sir. Your Honorable Defensor.
Thank you, Mr. Herbosa. Maraming salamat po. Magandang umaga. Kahit na ho, Mr. Herbosa, hindi naman po kinakailangan mismo yung loan agreement. Kung makukuha natin, mas maganda. Pero I'm sure, Mr. Herbosa, yung mga board approvals ninyo, sa committees ninyo, yan po yung na-preserve yung minutes ng board ng DBP.
Sir, we will check again, but I can say whatever we have right now, we will produce, but we're following our policy po. As Attorney Sor Adjong, our Chief Legal, has assured you of. But we will double check again, but that's why we're saying po, Your Honor, that we can refer you to PI1 and PI2 in case they will still have copies of such transactions relevant to the Lopez loans.
Okay. Thank you, thank you.
So marami po tayong resources, Your Honor.
Okay, may Comsec, may I order you to please invite PI1 and PI2 to the next hearing so that we can be and request the documents and contact details from DBP so that this hearing can proceed. We can proceed in our next hearing. With regards to the Lopez Group, Congresswoman Dindy Bautista is also requesting documents, corporate rehabilitations of plans of 3 companies, Bayantel, Central CATV, and Maynilad. Mr. Tirona, do I have your commitment on that you will submit within 1 month from today, those documents, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we will endeavor to retrieve these documents from storage, and if they are available, we will submit the same to the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tirona. Congresswoman Dindy, you have 15 minutes for your interpellation remaining. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just like with the Lopez Group also. I just like to see also a copy of the loan agreements from Lopez to the DBP, so we can fully understand if this what collaterals, if there's any, were involved in this transaction, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Tirona, information on collaterals also on the documents requested for our next hearing.
Again, Mr. Chairman, we will endeavor to look for these documents since these have been for more than 10 years or so. The other problem we have, Mr. Chairman, is the documents, the companies like Maynilad and Bayantel are no longer part of the Lopez Group, Mr. Chairman. So therefore, we do not have control or access to any files or records about the documents because these have remained with the company and are no longer part of the Lopez.
I think the documents that Congresswoman Bautista is asking for, those documents wherein that Bayantel and Maynilad were still part of your conglomerate. So you need, not after it was sold. So please provide any rehabilitation plan that was taken up that time, more than 10 years ago, before the next hearing, 1 month.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we did commit to endeavor to submit the rehabilitation plans and everything because these are on record with the courts.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
with regards to the second question about the original documents on the DBP loans, let me reiterate that these remained with the companies like Bayantel and Maynilad. So therefore, we do not have access to such documents because they have remained with the companies which are no longer under the control of the law.
Okay. Madam Comsec, can we write directly the new owners, new leaders of Maynilad and Bayantel to request for the documents related to this House Resolution 1040? Congresswoman Dindy, you may proceed. You still have 12 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that's all. I just need further documents so we could study this matter. We could give, we could
Thank you.
clarify, Mr. Chair. So that's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Honorable Bautista. Next in the list of interpellators is Representative Jonathan C. Alvarado. Representative Jonathan, Kuya Alvarado, you are hereby recognized. Okay, he's not currently on Zoom. May we now proceed with Representative Cesar Jimenez Jr. as the next interpolator. Representative Jimenez, you are hereby recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Honorable Jimenez, you may proceed with your question. 20 minutes.
Yes, good morning to my dear colleagues and to our invited guests. I do not have any questions so far, Mr. Chairman, except that just a concern. Medyo worried din ako sa mga sinasabi ng mga invited guests natin, with all due respect, especially sa mga documents na kailangan ng committee natin. Actually, I was agreeable with the statement made by Congressman Defensor earlier na sana masupena ng maaga ang mga dokumentong kailangan natin. Just to air my concern, Mr. Chairman, for example, malinaw naman sa atin na pagbayad na yung loan, we can get rid of the documents as stated by law. Pero sa pinag-uusapan natin dito, hindi naman itong payment ng loan, kung hindi condonation or write-off ng loan. So malaking diferensya ho yan para sabihin natin na pwede na nila actually the word even is to destroy those documents, and we need them now. So I hope these documents are still available, and in due time makukuha natin po agad ito. So in the meantime po, itong concern natin po, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito is billions of pesos. Hindi lang ho ito million, but billions of pesos. So I hope we can get the documents as soon as possible time, Mr. Chairman. That would be all in the meantime.
Thank you, Honorable Jimenez. We all want to get those documents, and we have given those entities 1 month to produce the documents before the next hearing. Next, thank you. Next to interpolate is the Honorable Mike Defensor. You are recognized, Mr. Honorable Defensor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our dear colleagues, Honorable Sultay, the Honorable Jimenez, for their statements on this. Kasi po, Mr. Chairman, this is not for our consumption, pero sa consumption po ng public. Yung pong ating mga bangko, katulad po nagkaroon tayo ng krisis. Una pa pala, ang bangko po nagpapautang sa mga tao at sa mga korporasyon. At batay po doon, nagbabayad yung mga korporasyon at bangko sa kanila. Pag hindi po sila nakapagbayad, nagiging non-performing loan. Di po ba? At pagka ito po'y talagang tuloy-tuloy na hindi nakapagbayad, binigyan ng batas ng ating Kongreso at Senado, pumasa sila ng batas ng Special Purpose Vehicle. Ito yung pinag-usapan na SPAV. Na kung saan ang mga loans na hindi gumagalaw, yung mga utang na hindi gumagalaw, inilalagay dito. Ito po'y binibenta ng may diskwento. Kung ang pinautang sa iyo 100, hindi mo na mabayaran, ibibenta doon ng 50 pesos. At doon naman po nila aayusin ulit. Pwedeng bayaran ng original proponent, in this case, the Lopez family, or pwedeng lang ibenta sa kung saan kung di na humabayaran. So, ganito po yung nangyari. Na ang sinasabi dito, nagpautang ang DBP ng kung saan kumpanya at negosyo at umabot po sa hindi nababayaran. Siyempre, pag hindi na ako nababayaran, ang DBP ngayon, inilagay niya na sa special purpose vehicle. Ngayon, ang una kong katanungan, kasi sinasabi ho natin, nakakatakot po ang sitwasyon natin ngayon. Yung Philippine Investment 1 and 2, yan po ang local partners o itinatag ng Lehman Brothers na siyang bumili ng mga loans. Ang Lehman Brothers, so, kung di ako nagkakamali, nagsara noong 2014. Kung di ako nagkakamali, no? So ito pong dalawang kumpanya na to, sarado na rin. Ang sinasabi ng DBP, wala na sa kanila yung dokumento. And of course, ang Lopez group will have to supply the documents. Bigyan natin ng oras para mapakita yung mga dokumento. Pero malinaw naman no, na meron kayong mga existing documentation dahil para yan pumasok sa special purpose vehicle, idinadaan nyo po sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas para aprobahan. Ang una kong katanungan, tama po ba, Attorney Adjong? Are you related to Congressman Adjong? Your cousin? Yes. Well, I just want to ask, Attorney Adjong, di po ba bago kayo payagan na ilagay ninyo yung mga non-performing loans, in this case about 9 billion, tama po ba? Please speak on the record, Attorney Adjong.
Yes, Your Honor. It's 9.55 billion.
9.55 billion. Bago po nyo inilagay yan, mamaya ho ako magre-rewind ha. look doon muna sa nangyari. Di po ba dapat nagkaroon kayo ng certificate of eligibility sa lahat ng loans?
Yes, Your Honor. We should have received a certificate of eligibility from the BSP in order for us to avail of the incentives under the law.
Doon po sa mga dokumentong hawak nyo ngayon, ano pong mga loans ang pinayagan at binigyan ng certificate of eligibility? Meaning, again, not for us but for the public, pinayagan kayo na ibenta nyo yung utang na yan sa special purpose vehicle. Ano po ang mga kumpanya na pinayagan para magkaroon ng certificate of eligibility?
Out of the 4 companies subject of the resolution, 2 were covered by certificates of eligibility while 2 are not.
Ano po yung 2 na pinayagan?
These are Central CATV.
Yan po ang Sky Cable, kung di ako nagkakamali.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
And Bayan Telecommunications.
Bayan Telecommunications. So yung pong dalawa binigyan ng certificate of eligibility. Yung dalawa pong hindi.
These are Maynilad Water Services and Benpress Holdings Corporation.
Ang Maynilad at Benpress ay walang eligibility.
Wala po.
Paano pong nangyari? Again, thank you, Attorney General. I'll get back to you. Hube, may I ask you, tama po ba, kasi kayo po yung nagbibigay ng certificate of eligibility, sa inyo pong records, sino po ang may certificate na eligibility ng mga kumpanya?
Yes, the BSP issued a COE for Bayantel. Bayantel, sir.
Isa lang
Mr.
po?
Chair. Sir, yung sa CATV po kasi, there was no COE that was issued for CATV, Maynilad, and Benpress Holdings, sir.
Ma'am, di ba ho requirement ng SPAB law na kailangan binigyan nyo na dapat ng certificate of eligibility?
Sir, prior to the issuance of a COE, the bank, in this case DBP, has to submit to us a master list of eligible NPAs. And based on our due diligence review, if some of those do not qualify in the sense that it does not become eligible as defined by the SPV Act, no COE will be issued to those accounts, sir.
At Ms. Cube, pagka po hindi nyo pinigyan ng certificate of eligibility yung kanilang sinumite, hindi dapat ipasok sa special purpose vehicle. Hindi dapat ibenta ng DBP sa kahit kaninong kumpanya.
I understand, sir, that the SPV Act has the COE as one of the requirements within which prior to the enrollment of DBP to the SPV.
Thank you, Ms. Cube. Ang katanungan ko lang ho, medyo naguluhan lang ho ako, no? Sa inyo, Bayantel lang ang pwede.
Sir, based on available records, a COE was issued to Bayantel.
Wala po at hindi kasama ang Sky Cable.
There are no records, sir, pertaining to the COE issued by the BSP to DBP pursuant to RA 9182 for the following: Maynilad, CATV, and Benpress Holdings.
So sa inyo pong records sa ngayon, and that is official.
Yes, sir, it is.
Sorry, kasi po kayo under oath, no? So anything you say may be used against you. So sa inyo po isa lang. In the case of DBP, ma'am, bakit po dalawa?
Central CATV's, Your Honor, was listed as Philippine Home Cable.
Hindi ko po naintindihan. Bakit po sa kanilang record so hindi kasama, pero sa inyo po dalawa?
Yung pong sa COE, yung Central CATV was listed in the Certificate of Eligibility as Philippine Home Cable.
Okay, so therefore, is in your opinion, Ms. Cube, kung ito po hindi nabigyan ng eligibility, hindi dapat ipinasok sa special purpose vehicle?
Yes, Your Honor. Okay.
At kung nangyari po yun, ang ginawang yun ay illegal?
I suppose so, Mr. Chair.
Would you know, Ms. Cube, ano yung amount na pinasok na hindi binigyan ng certification?
Not at this time, sir. I will have to recheck and ask for the necessary clearance to provide this committee with the said information po.
Thank you, Ms. Cube. But more or less, Ms. Adjong, doon sa binanggit ni Ms. Cube na tatlo lang, ay isa lang pala. Yung pong tatlong yun is about 1.4 billion pesos at the time of 2006. Tama po ba?
The OPB, total OPB, Mr. Chair, was 1.6 billion. 1.6
billion. So, Ms. Adjong, kasi gusto ko lang iklaro, Mr. Chairman, Yung mga nakaupo pong opisyalis ngayon, including Mr. Herbosa, hindi po sila damay dito. Wala po silang alam dito, wala silang ginawa dito. Ito yung nangyari 14 years ago. At kung anumang aksyon nangyari nung panahon na yon, hindi po kasama yung mga kasamahan nating opisyal sa ngayon ng DBP. And I'd just like to clarify that. In your opinion, Mr. Jong, illegal po yung nangyari na ginawa ng DBP.
Mr. Chair, no, Mr. Chair.
Without certification?
Mr. Chair, if there's no certificate of eligibility issued to an account, it's still a regular transfer, but without the tax incentives under the law, under the SPV law, Mr. Chair. The DBP can still transfer all its rights under a loan obligation, but without the incentives of the SPV Act.
Can you put that in writing, Madam Chair? Mr. Chairman, that opinion? Because again, I go back to BSP. In all transactions, not just the the Development Bank of the Philippines, yung mga private banks po, required sila na mag-submit ng kanilang mga for certificate of eligibility.
Yes, sir. The SPV, Mr. Chair, provides for the application of the COE for the eligible NPAs to the BSP. Sir, if I may just jump off from what Attorney Adjong said, the SPV Act also provides for a tax incentive. I think that is where Attorney Adjong is coming from.
I agree, Ms. Cube, but ang sinasabi ni Ms. Adjong, legal yun. Wala lang silang benefits. Ang sinasabi ko, hindi. Dapat the BSP should first allow it to be eligible for SPAV.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, our position is that the transfer of the accounts not covered by COE, the transfers are still valid under Civil Code, but without the tax incentives under the SPV Act.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you can just put that...
Honorable Defensor, I'll just remind you of 10 minutes. You consumed your first 10 minutes.
I'm done, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you can just put that in writing so that we can, the committee can look into that. Because medyo delikado po yan. Kasi papaliwanag ko lang po, especially for the government banks. Pag kami non-performing loans ka, nakipagkuntsabaan ka, kasi nangyari po dito, Mr. Chair, maraming mga negosyante, ang sila mismo nagtatayo ng kanilang special purpose vehicle. So yung utang nilang 100, bibili ng 50 na special purpose vehicle, lulusot na po sila. Tama po ba?
I would not be able to confirm that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, pangalawa pong question, just to put this on record. Di po ba itong Lehman Brothers na bumili nitong inyong loans? Hindi po yan ang mother Lehman Brothers. Tama po?
Lehman Brothers Asian Investment Limited.
Tama po, Asian. At yan po, binuo sa Cayman Islands.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And we know that the Cayman Islands, ginagamit po nila yan para itago ang maraming korporasyon at maraming nilang galaw, dyan ibinubuo.
I would not be in a position to confirm that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I will rewind. Re-rewind na po ako, Di po ba ang lahat ng loans kinakailangan may collateral?
Ideally, it should have collateral.
Ideally, it should have collateral. Ang sinasabi ko po dito, Attorney Jong, bago nyo dalhin sa special purpose vehicle, bago nyo ibenta, yung pautang ninyo, titingnan nyo muna yung collateral. Kasi pag hindi siya nakapagbayad, kukunin nyo yung collateral. Tama po ba?
The collateral serves as a second way out, Mr. Chair.
That is the first way.
The first way out, Mr. Chair, is the cash flow.
Of course, of course. Cash flow, collateral, pagkatapos mo, pagka wala na talaga, hindi na makapagbayad, dun ka lang papasok sa special purpose vehicle. Pag talagang walang-wala ka na. Tama po ba? Under your legal process.
We can also file a collection case, Mr. Chair.
Yes, file a collection case.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Ang sinasabi ko lang po, last resort parati ang special purpose vehicle. Kasi wala na, hindi na kayo makasingil kaya bibigay nyo lang special purpose vehicle.
The premise, Mr. Chair, is that all of these accounts were already NPA as of that time.
Thank you. So I'm very happy that Attorney Adjong, in fact, is taking an aggressive position towards the loans. Ano pong collateral meron ang Maynilad nung binigyan nyo ng loan? 1 billion po yan.
Mr. Chair, for the specific details, we would need to refer to the loan agreements, but based on available record, Maynilad.
No, you don't need to go to the loan agreements because the legal services, your particular department, before they allowed this to go into SPAV, made a study. So pagdating pa lang po sa board minutes ninyo, makikita doon. So I'm asking you again now, what was the collateral for Maynilad? Nasa records niyo po yan.
We have to confirm, Mr. Chairman, the specific details of all these transactions.
So, when you made the recommendation to go to SPAV, hindi nyo po nakita yan? Siyempre, bago nyo po sabihin, ibenta nyo na sa SPAV, sasabihin nyo muna, katulad sinabi mo, Atty. Adjong, dapat kolektahin natin yan. Dapat mag-file tayo dyan. Di ba? Bago tayo magkaroon ng Congressman Chanco is a very good businessman. He knows this process. Our chairman, the Aglipay family, they have their own business and they know the process. Pag hindi ka na makapagbayad, i-call ang iyong collateral. Tama po ba, Atty. Adjong? That's the process? You were saying...
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes. So what was your collateral?
For the specific accounts, again, Mr. Chair, we have to refer to the loan agreements.
No, you don't. You don't. Because pina-approve nyo po yan sa board resolution ninyo. Sa board of minutes, sinabi ninyo, ma'am, hindi na ako makapagbayad to eh. Kaya po, at ito po yung wala po silang collateral, so we now go to the SPAV. Mr. Chair, to the BSP, di ba ma'am Kubi, ganun po yung proseso ng bangko?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it is. In fact, if I may inject po, a provision of the SPV Act, it says there that the notification requirements, for the eligible NPAs or non-performing assets to be enrolled by a particular financial institution, a certification has to be issued by a senior officer of a bank attesting to the following. Sir, pertinent po to your line of thought now, a notification requirement to the borrowers has been complied with and a maximum of 90-day period for renegotiation or restructuring has been complied with. So, sir, aligned with that, yes, going back to the collaterals that supports the loan is the first step towards the recovery of a particular loan that has gone sour.
Thank you, Ms. Kube. Mr. Chair, I will rest my case for the moment, but I'm very sure of the basis for what happened as regards yung pong pagbigay ng DBP sa special purpose vehicle. But Mr. Chair, for our purposes, baka po pwede nga kahit na yung board minutes at yung memo from legal, kasi sila po yung nag-aral doon eh. Not Atty. Adjong, I'm not particularly referring to Atty. Adjong ha, pero yung ginawa po ng inyong department. Kasi gumawa po yan ng pag-aaral, gumawa kayo ng letter, sinulatan nyo sila, hindi kayo nagbabayad, tapos syempre, i-call nyo yung collateral. Pag, ewan ko, what happened, kung bakit hindi nagkaroon ng ganitong proseso, or if hindi na talaga nyo magawa at that time, at naging non-performing loan na po yun. So again, Mr. Chair, kinaklarify ko po, hindi po yun yung DBP ngayon. But ito po yung kailangan sagutin. Paano nakapasok ang mga loans na to sa SPAV without the eligibility of the BSP? Yung po ba ay, ako po, ang posisyon ko po dyan, kailangan nagkaroon ng BSP certification. Okay. And number 2, yung pong before the call. Bakit siya napasok sa special purpose vehicle? Ginawa niya ba niya at in-exhaust niya yung means para in this particular collateral? Because in this, Mr. Chairman, makikita natin yung sinasabing bakit nagkaroon ng pananaw na masyadong napagbigyan, ng pananaw na in effect, written off ito. In effect, hindi ito binayaran. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. At kung ano po yung motion later on, I will support the wisdom and decision of the chair. Thank you po.
Thank you, Honorable Defensor. I'd like to recognize for his interjection, Honorable Bong Suntay.
Thank you very much. Attorney Adjong, would you agree with me that the nature of transfers sa mga SPV of non-performing assets are in the nature of true sale?
Yes, it is.
Parang bentahan yan eh.
Yes, it is. Mr.
So, hindi lang yung loan documents. So kung true in the nature of true sale yan, there would have been a deed of sale coming from DBP to the SPV.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And if there was a deed of sale, na ano yan, na paano yan, na notaryohan yan because all documents, legal documents are notarized. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, we submitted copies of the deed of sale.
Honorable Bong Suntay, they submitted
Okay.
copies of the
There are
sale
copies
purchase
of the deed
agreement.
of sale. Okay. Now, aside from that, going back to the train of
Excuse me, Honorable Suntay. We thought it was an interjection. If it's an interpellation, you need to line up your number.
sorry,
number 8.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
It's okay. Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Chair, ako one quick question.
Yes, you're next in line in the interpellators. You have 20 minutes.
Hindi, okay lang. Mag-interject lang muna ako. I'll let them kasi I've got.
Okay.
Question, Mr. Chair. This was filed July 2020, that's correct?
2019.
2019 ba?
Yes.
Okay. When was DBP or...
Ay, 2020, yeah, July 2020.
2020. Were you given a copy as soon as the resolution was filed, or did you know about this hearing just today or about the resolution just recently, Mr. Chair?
Our first communication to the Committee on Good Government was in August 2020.
They have a communication and they wrote us their answer to the Honorable previous chairman, August 18, 2020.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, palagi ko they had enough time din naman sana. I think you would have known possible questions, especially marami tayong tatanungin with regards to that one. But since first hearing to, I would appreciate that all documents that's being requested and all questions to be answered sana ng mga guests natin. Parang yung August has been a long time na rin, even if it's pandemic, ilang buwan na rin yun. So we would appreciate, sabi naman po ninyo, you will cooperate. And kahit yung sinasabi nyo wala ng loan agreement, I'm sure may mga natitira pang mga tao doon or may natitira kayong trace of documents that can actually answer the questions that we want to hear the answers to. So yun lang, Mr. Chair, I would just like to put that on record that we communicated to them as early as August of 2020.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker Herrera, that we give them 1 month from today to provide all documents. Next to interpellate is the Honorable Ria Vergara of the 3rd District of Nueva Ecija. You are recognized, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to follow up on the question of Honorable Defensor. He wanted to know of the 9.5 billion that applied for COE, may we know what are the other companies other than Buy and Tell? Would you have that information?
Mr. Chair, there were 2,700 plus accounts subject of the...
Yes. Can we have a record of all the companies? You cannot, if you cannot give the names today, just on documentary compliance, if you can give the list of companies, more that those 2,000 companies that comprise of the 9.6 billion to the Secretariat.
And according to the letter prepared by President Herbosa, he said of that 9.556 billion, DBP recovered 3.83 billion. So
Yes, Mr. Chair.
yes, and of that 9.5, only Buy and Tell's loan is included there. Is that right? According to the records of the BSP.
Let me clarify, Mr. Chair. Philippine Home Cable, which is listed as Central CATV, is listed in the COE as Philippine Home Cable. So it was given a COE. Buy and Tell was covered by a COE. Only Maynilad and Benpress were not covered by COE.
Okay. I was a businessman during this time, so I understand what was going on. The Asian financial crisis hit, and my company was also in trouble. Would you know, do you remember, all of these loans are peso denominated, or were there dollar denominated loans here?
There was $1 denominated, Madam
Which one?
Chair. It's buy and tell.
Buy and tell.
Yes.
So if it's dollar denominated, during that time, 95 interest rates, US dollar interest rates were like 5% versus Philippine loans were like 15 to 16%. Did DBP do a sensitivity analysis that in case the peso dropped from 25 to 35, then they could see that the loans now would become more expensive for its client? Did it require that of buy and tell, this foreign exchange exposure?
Mr. Chair, we would have to check our records if a sensitivity study was done on the loan of buy and tell.
Yes, because the reason I ask that is it's a Philippine company and its revenue stream is in peso. And although it's attractive to borrow dollar with a lowered interest rate, I think it would have been prudent for the bank to recognize that this company will be paid in pesos. And so I was just wondering if you looked at that, because I was looking at that when I availed of my loan, and I saw that if the peso hit 35 to 1, then I would have a big problem with my cash flow. So something I just like to ask. The second question I'd like to ask is, since these 4 companies are all Lopez owned companies, did the bank ever consider to ask for a cross guarantee from ABS-CBN, another Lopez company? Was there a cross guarantee?
Normally, we would have to check the individual loan agreements, Mr. Chair.
But they were secured adequately with collateral. Is that fair to say?
We'll have to check the specific details of each loan agreement or loan transaction, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So were these companies financially stable or had a good cash flow when you lent it money at that time? At the time the loans were taken out?
We can only presume, Mr. Chair, that at the time the loans were granted, some of which were granted as early as 1989, we're only assuming that indeed they were stable as of that time.
Okay, because buy and tell is 1995, is that right? Or they've been your client before 1995 and they took out additional loans in 1995. How is that the first time they became your client in 1995?
We'll check if there were previous transactions, but the loan subject of the transaction is 1995.
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Because I now that you mentioned that if they were your clients before 1995, I'd like to know, prior to the default, how much money did DBP already make on these loans? Because having borrowed money also before in the past, I mean, I took out the loan with Land Bank of the Philippines for 330 million. By the time I paid everything, I had paid close to 1.1 billion. So I just like to know, prior to the default, how profitable were these companies to your cash flow? Not the company's profitability, but had they repaid their loan already? The principal. That's my question. Now, if you're going to answer that buy and tell only became your client in 1995, Maynilad only in 2001, CATV in 1997, and Ben Press in 1996, I'd like to know, before they defaulted, how profitable, how much income was DBP making on this loan?
We will, if we may be allowed to check our records, we can provide those information, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and of course you knew that these loans were being used to expand and grow the business and not being used to pay off other debts that these companies had. Is that correct?
Oh, we will have to check on each specific purpose of the loan agreement, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so just to reiterate, only buy and tell was the dollar denominated loan.
Mr. Chair.
Interjection, no, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Suntay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this the particular resolution investigating this loans was filed way back last June, and I couldn't help but in almost all the questions being asked, Attorney Ajong would say that they would have to uh, to refer back to documents and so that they could answer. Why did they come to today's hearing not prepared, knowing that questions would be asked to, with regards to those loans? Kasi parang wala ho tayong makukuhang sagot dito kung lahat lang ng kasagutan sa mga tanong na ibibigay o tatanungin ng ating mga representante dito is that I would have to refer back to the loan documents. Kanina sinabi na niya na wala na yung loan documents. Wala nang babalikan. Yun ba yung ibig niya sabihin?
Attorney Jong, may we please direct you to be well prepared next time, next hearings, since you know the scope already or character of the questions we will ask. Maybe you can prepare more the next time.
We will do that, Mr. Chair.
Please continue. Thank you, Honorable Suntay. Please continue, ma'am. Honorable Vergara.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's just the basis of my question. I just like to see how these companies performed before they defaulted and how much income DBP earned at that point. And then my last question, Mr. Chair, is this law allowed for an oversight committee to be headed by 7 House of Representatives and 7 senators to oversee the implementation of the SPV law? And Mr. Chair, I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I just like to know, when this law was implemented, was there ever a committee hearing on the implementation of this law? I mean, is that something?
Maybe the BSP can answer that, or the SEC. Are you aware of any? Can you repeat the question, ma'am?
Yes, sir. How Republic Act 9182 was made into law, an oversight committee was created, composed of 7 senators and 7 House of Representative members. I was wondering, was it ever convened to check if the implementation of the SPV law complied with everything written in the law?
Mr. Chair, Madam, I will have to check if that is within the ambit of our knowledge, because as far as implementation of the SPV is concerned, the BSP's main task was to issue the COE with regard to the applications of supervised financial institutions po. But let me check if I can help gather said information.
Thank you. And last, sir, Attorney Ajong, so only Buy and Tell availed of the SPV law, but Maynilad and Ben Press also, these assets, these loans were sold also, but it didn't use the SPV law. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Buy and Tell and Central CATV were covered by COEs. Maynilad and Ben Press were not.
They were not, but also disposed of.
Yes, Mr. Chair, they were made part of the asset sale and purchase, the bulk sale.
The bulk sale.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a part of the 9.5 billion.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Vergara. Before we go to the next interpellator, can we have a short interjection from the Zoom? Honorable Bautista, you are recognized. Yes. Honorable Bautista, do you have something to say? Naka-mute.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I agree with Congressman Defensor and Congresswoman Herrera and Congressman Suntay. Mr. Chair, we filed this resolution sometime July of 2020. And I've seen the reply of our guest, and it was sent August. So I'm just worried that they have ample time to prepare for this hearing. They should have anticipated that this will be scheduled for hearing. Just worried that given the time since July to August and until now, that they cannot answer our questions properly. They have not prepared for the hearing, regardless if you sent out the notice for this hearing just last December, but this was already filed a long time ago. So they should have anticipated, Mr. Chair, that there was going to be a hearing, and they should have been prepared for it a long time ago. They could have compiled all the documents necessary for this hearing so we could properly study and we will know what really happened with regards to the loan condonation. This happened 14 years ago, a long time ago, and we're not talking about the DBP or the BSP that is now. Of course, this was before. So we would just like to study really what happened so we can review their policies and we can correct them that this could not happen again for the benefit of the Filipino people, Mr. Chair. So I would just like to request our guests that the chairman has given ample time, again, additional 1 month to prepare for all the documents necessary for us in Congress to study this. I'd just like to request that they comply with all the documents that we've been requesting, because it's hard for us to proceed with this hearing, Mr. Chair, if we don't have all the details. So that's it, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to request really for all the participants in this and the stakeholders in this hearing that they come prepared next hearing, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Honorable Bautista. The chair reiterates its request that let's come prepared next time, and within the 1 month prescribed period to submit the documents requested. So now we move to
Mr. Chair.
yes, Ma'am, Honorable
Sorry,
Vergara.
very short.
Yes,
one,
yes, ma'am.
Mr.
Okay
Chair.
lang po.
It's just confusing
Okay.
because when you say loan condonation, it's in the resolution. That's why it's a clarificatory question, Mr. Chair. A loan condonation means it's like you had a loan, di binayaran. But what happened here, and it's very clear in the SPV law that it's a sale of non-performing assets. Yes, bad debt. So I just like to make that clarification, Mr. Chair.
Well noted, ma'am. It's on the record. Thank you, Honorable Vergara. Next to interpolate, the Honorable Suntay.
Attorney Adjong, can you refresh us again? Ano ba yung procedure natin in when DBP considers yung classifying loans as or assets as non-performing, and ano yung nagiging basis for considering the price whenever you sell such assets?
For these specific transactions, Mr. Chair, these were non-performing accounts that have remained unpaid for at least 180 days from the time they became past due or any of the event of default have occurred.
So 180 days lang, then you could classify them as non-performing assets regardless of how huge the loan is. Now, kasi kung...
Sir, Honorable Suntay, can I,
Yes,
1 minute? I would like to recognize the Honorable Deputy Speaker Tito Atienza, on Zoom, the Honorable Deputy Speaker Strike Revilla, Representative Marvy Marino, Representative Carlos Sorate. Okay, thank you. You may now proceed, Honorable Suntay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For example, itong if only as far back as your memory could recall. For example, Maynilad. Kailan, when did Maynilad apply for the loan, and when did they start defaulting on payments?
Based on records, available records, Mr. Chair, Maynilad, the loan was granted in 2000 and it became non-performing in 2003.
So after 3 years, hindi na sila nakakapag-bayad nung loan nila or principals dun sa nakakapaghulog. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Since as of November 2003, Maynilad had been considered non-performing.
Okay. So what about with regards to say TV o home cable? When was the loan taken and kailan nagsimulang hindi nagbayad?
Central CATV was considered NPA as of 2001.
So when did they start when was the loan granted?
It's 1989, Mr. Chair.
1989, tapos 2001, hindi na nakapagbayad.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, what about Benpress?
Benpress was earlier than 2000, Mr. Chair. It became non-performing since 2003.
So 2003, it became non-performing. And well, babalik sana ako sa katanungan, pero kagaya ng nasagot mo kanina, because I was going to ask, will also ask yung mga collateral given by the different companies. But as you mentioned, kailangan balikan nyo yung records nyo. So I hope doon sa next hearing natin, you will have that records dahil hindi naman lang sa loan documents makikita yan eh. Makikita rin yan doon sa minute ng board because not only in loan applications but also in write-off or in considering assets as non-performing or preparing it for a sale to SPV. Siyempre pag-uusapan ng board ng DBP yan eh. So we would know. I'm sure binigay doon yung nakasaad doon kung ano yung collateral, kung magkano yung utang, kung gaano katagal nang hindi nagbabayad, makikita natin yun doon. Now, going back also to the question of Congressman Vergara, was it not considered these companies were all interrelated? They have common owners. Was this not considered also nung may mga kumpanya na nagde-default tapos nag-grant pa tayo ng loan doon sa mga ibang kumpanya owned by the same individuals? For example, also, I also have a company and whenever we take out loans, ang ginagawa ng bangko is ginagawang surety yung mga ibang kumpanya ko na nasa labas ng kumpanya nangungutang just to ensure na pagka nag-default yung kumpanyang nangungutang, yung mga ibang kumpanya namin, yun naman ang pagbabayarin. So, with regards to these particular companies, hindi ba nangyari yun?
Mr. Chair, with respect to the presence of a cross-default provision in this specific loan transaction, we would need to refer to the individual loan agreements.
Okay. Some of the companies, as you mentioned, Maynilad and Benpress, were sold to SPVs kahit na wala silang COE. But others, like say TV, had an COE under Philippine Home Cable, diba? So why the difference in procedure compliance?
Because some of the accounts, part of the transfer, were not eligible under the SPV Act, Mr. Chair.
Mm-hmm. When you say not eligible, bakit? Why was Maynilad not eligible?
First, Mr. Chair, the IRA provided for a cutoff that the loan account should have been non-performing as of June 30, 2002.
Mm-hmm.
So, although, as we can see on the records, Mr. Chair, two of these accounts turned non-performing after the cutoff.
Yeah, 2003. So
Yes,
that was
sir.
the reason. Now, since hindi na sila eligible, well, I would like to know in the next hearing kung ano yung naging ginawa ng DBP Did it try to first to get yung collateral? Meron ba silang mga narimatang collateral na binigay ng Maynilad, or was this clean loan na walang collateral, grinantan lang sila ng loan? Ano ba yung kaso? Binigyan ba sila ng loan kahit walang collateral na binigay?
Again, Mr. Chair, with respect to the particulars of each loan transaction, we would have to refer to the
Okay.
specific
So
agreement.
at least alam mo na yung itatanong ko next hearing, at sana mapaghandaan. I would want to know if these loans were collateralized or it was just given, na binigay lang kahit na walang collateral attached to it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, but to all of these accounts, the bank, in accordance with the SPV Act, the bank wrote letters to all of these companies, giving them 90 days within which to renegotiate or pay the bank, Mr. Chair.
So with regards to these companies, did they renegotiate?
Considering that they were transferred to the SPV, most likely they did not, or none was approved, at least, Mr. Chair.
Mhm. So if they tried to renegotiate, I'm sure the minutes of the board would also reflect such intention to renegotiate. Siyempre, merong proposal na binigayan, and the proposal would have been considered by the board. So it is no longer part of the known documents, but part of the minutes of the board of DBP. So pwede natin makita yan doon.
We will check again, Mr. Chair.
Now, ang kinakatakot ko lang rin kasi is like, totally this is in aid of legislation, is especially for clean loans. Pwede pala akong, kunyari malakas ako sa DBP, pwede pala akong mangutang without a collateral, tapos hindi ko, kunyari dati hindi ko sinasabi kayo, tapos hindi ko babayaran, and I would get another company to apply for an SPV, para yung intention ko, hindi ko talaga babayaran yung utang. Sabihin ko doon sa SPV ko, bilin mo yung utang ko, yung non-performing assets, at papatakbuhin na lang natin sa susunod. Those are things that we want to we want to avoid. Now, yung 9182 was actually legislated in order to encourage private sectors to buy non-performance of financial institutions, so that those financial institutions could have more resources to use. Pero ayaw rin natin magamit yung 9182 in order to encourage yung behest loans or yun nga, yung mga transactions which would be inimical to the public interest.
Mr. Chair, if I may comment,
Yes,
the
please.
benefits under the SPV Act were time-bound. So 2 years from the effectivity of the Amendatory Act, the RA 9383, the benefits provided thereunder were no longer available.
Yes, I know. I'm talking about yun nga, yung mga loans granted during the effectivity of nung SPV. Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Honorable Suntay. The next to interpellate is the Honorable Rita Robles. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kanina po, natanong na po halos lahat ng aking mga katanungan. Ang napansin ko lang po kasi during that time, when the year that the Lopez's borrowed money from the DBM, it was the time that the economy was so bad. So nung time na yon, I for myself has an experience na nag-loan din ako, and after 10 years, a bank, for example, ay binili ng isang bangko din. When we were looking at the records, wala na talaga sa archive. So I think yung ating disappointments with this kind of process ay talagang nangyayari, hindi lang sa DBP, pati pa rin sa ibang bangko. And I really believe when you come back on the next time for DBP and BSP, I just hope you make a study on all the SPVL law and other act na meron tayo sa Constitution natin para mas masagot nyo lahat ng katanungan. Yun lang po, Mr. Speaker, and like to thank you for this opportunity. Kanila, no? Ano ba yung sinabi? Ayaw ko.
Which actually caused this particular hearing. So maybe I'd like to take advantage of the presence of the DBP officers to clarify these issues. Allegations of illegal writing off, allegations of condonation of huge sums of money. In fact, one of the items that I read in the media, all of this amount to something like 1.6 billion pesos. So it's indeed alarming. So even if transactions were done 20 years ago, because of the huge amount being claimed to have been defraud of the Philippine government, I believe that it should have been taken up. So at this point, I'd like to clear the matter with the DBP officials. Is the SPV a legal way of financial transactions within the government and funding institutions? Or is
in 2002, Mr. Chair, and in fact, there's an effort to somehow reenact the same law under the FIST, or the Financial Institutions Strategic Transfer Act.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
To be specific about it now, all of this emanated from the Lopez appearances here on the issue of the ABS-CBN, and where I used the word browbeating, and sad to say, members of the committee of investigating the matter even removed the word browbeating. I will use the word that again, Mr. Chairman. The witnesses then were browbeaten. They were not allowed to explain fully the answers that they were being asked of the questions. So I'm asking the same question now. Meron po bang nilabag na batas dun sa sinasabing fund sale of ABS corporations and the Ben Press Corporation, Maynilad, at meron po bang ganansyang nakuha mga Lopez doon in that transaction?
On the first question, Mr. Chair, what I can say is that it was audited by the Commission on Audit, and in the annual audit report, there was no finding of irregularity. On the second issue, Mr. Chair, as soon as the accounts were transferred to the SPV, DBP no longer had any transaction, or at least with respect to those 4 loan accounts, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, would the lady claim that the DBP lost money in the exercise of the SPV procedures?
Attorney, can you answer?
Mr. Chair, if I may explain, the context of the law and the situation then was that these were non-performing assets already. So, in the sense that they were non-performing already, parang you expect that loss would really be incurred. With respect to the total bulk sale transferred to PI1 and PI2, the outstanding principal balance then was 9.55 billion. And it was sold to Lehman Brothers and subsequently transferred to PI1 and PI2 in the amount of 3.88 billion. but that pertains to all the accounts transferred under the bulk
Sa madaling
segregation.
salita, Mr. Chairman, ang sinasabi nila, yung transaksyon ay covered by the provisions of the law. Am I correct to understand it that way?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And may I ask if the Lopez's gained from this exchange of papers? Sila po ba ay kumita in the sense na na-condone po ba yung utang? Nabawasan po ba yung utang? Nabura po ba yung utang? Ano po ba nangyari nung binili ng Lehman Brothers yung kanilang papeles galing sa DBP?
We would no longer know, Mr. Chair, how much or what were the negotiations between TI1 and TI2 on one hand and the Lopez companies on the other hand. Because at the time, the SPVs, meaning TI1 and TI2, stepped into the shoes of DBP as the lender, Mr. Chair.
Ang pagkaalam ko doon sa batas ng SPV at kinatigan naman ng Commission on Audit pagkat sinangayunan nila ang transaction. Madaling salita, everything was done in accordance with law. Second, the Lopez companies did not make any money simply because they have not been absolved in any way by the transfer of papers. Magbabayad pa rin sila. I'm sure nagbayad sila. Dahil kung hindi sila nagbayad, mapipinalize sila nung bumili. Magbabayad sila rin sa bumili. Hindi po naman condonation yung SPV. To clarify the issue, it is not a condonation. It is not a writing off. It is a purchase of papers of debt, indebtedness, from one corporation, Philippine corporation, bought by an international funding institutions, like in this case, Lehman Brothers, correct? Am I correct to say that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Pero yung utang ay utang pa rin. At yung utang, we are presuming, binayaran ng mga Lopez sa Lehman Brothers, hindi na sa DBP. Ibinenta ng DBP yung utang para ang magbabayad na, ang babayaran na ay yung bumili. I'm sure they bought it at a discount, but since the COA did not find anything irregular, so meaning it was done in accordance with the law. So at this point in time, Mr. Chairman, I am now speaking as an officer of the 18th Congress. Kung ang mga nag-a-allege ay based on their own conjecture and they have nothing to prove, bring to this committee and bring to this Congress, I would suggest that they should be required produce your papers of irregularity for this committee to continue deliberating on it and for the plenary to even take whatever comes out of this committee. Otherwise, if you're asking the DBP to produce papers which will be detrimental to them, I think that is a dream, a vision that is unfair, to say the least. We're asking them to penalize themselves. Kung meron tayong prueba, ituloy natin. Kung wala po naman tayong prueba, huwag naman natin aksayin ang panahon ng Kongreso sa mga allegation na wala naman dokumento. I can claim Marcos did this, Marcos did this, that. But if I did not keep documents to prove the allegations that I am making now, hindi po mananalo yung aking allegation. Ganun kasimple yan. Pero alam ko maraming masamang ginawa si Mr. Marcos. Alam ko maraming pagnanakaw na ginawa sila. Pero wala po tayong dokumento. Eh mahirap natin balikan ang panahon 20, 30, 40 years ago. At this point in time, I rest my case, having elicited from the DBP officers, there is nothing irregular in the exercise of the SPV, and the seller or the owner of the document do not make money in the transaction. Kung merong gumagawa ng pera dito, yung bumibili. Now, rightfully, because they have the capital, and that's their business, to make money out of financial transaction. Pero ang DBP, hindi rin naging kumita rito dahil ang nangyari, binenta nila yung pagkakautang sa kanila. Sinalo naman ng mas mayamang financing institution. Iikot lang tayo ng iikot at hanap tayo ng dokumento. It's unfair to demand from the DBP even to produce documents 18, 20 years ago. And the intention is to embarrass you and put you in deeper hot waters. It's even unfair. If there is any member of Congress today who is in possession of documents to prove that there was a wrongdoing and some people made money out of it, then maybe we should proceed. Otherwise, I will move for termination of all of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Noted, Honorable Chensa. Yes, you're recognized, Honorable Defensor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, maraming salamat po. Una po muna pagbati sa aking kasama kay kagalang-galang Deputy Speaker Atienza. Pero kanina naman po nung kami nagtanong, malinaw yung pag-uusap. Sa dokumento ng DBP, sa dokumento ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, dalawang ahensya po yung magkaiba. Walang certificate of eligibility yung pagkakapasok ng mga loans. Magmula sa DBP, BSP, bago sila pinasok sa Special Purpose Vehicle. Walang certificate of eligibility. Ang sinasabi po ng DBP, ang kanilang pananaw, legal. Dahil kahit walang certificate of eligibility, pwede. Ang pananaw ko po, at ito naman binanggit din ng BSP, hindi pwede. Pangalawa, Mr. Chairman, makikita sa loan documents ng DBP. Hindi na po yung loan documents, yun na lang po sa minutes. Na dalawa dyan o isa sa mga loans na yan na ibinigay bago pa ipasok sa SPAB ang walang collateral. Yan po yung may dokumento nandyan sa minutes ng Development Bank of the Philippines. Pinag-aralan po yan ng legal bago ipinasok. At makikita po dyan, and if I may ask Attorney Adjong, di po ba dapat nagkaroon ng joint security, but before the issuance of the DBP loan to Maynilad, there should have been a waiver under the JSS. Tama po ba?
Honorable Attorney, you may reply.
May I seek clarification on the document?
Joint and solitary signature for Maynilad.
I have not seen the document, Mr. Chair, but as part of our commitment, we will go into the
Yes.
records.
Maybe, Mr. Chairman, we can ask Mr. Orbosa, our president of DBP, who is here with us right now. If
Can we go to your second round?
No, Mr. Chairman, it was a point of privilege because the Honorable Deputy Speaker Atienza, with all due respect, tama naman po yung sinabi ni Honorable Atienza. Kung tayo po dito yung nag-witch hunt, huwag natin ituloy. At nakakaya naman sa DBP at sa Lopez Group. Pero kung mayroon naman pong dokumento at may kakulangan sa dokumento, dapat po natin pag-usapan. Tama po yung sinabi ni Honorable Atienza. Tinanong po niya kanina, nagkaroon pa ng benepisyo ang mga Lopezes. Tama ba, Attorney Adjong? From 9 billion, naging 3 billion na lang ang babayaran nila.
The 9 point,
Total yan po.
Yes.
the total for all
So if I put it in
2,000 companies.
I agree. So if we put it at 70%, at 1.6 billion, ang binayaran po na lang nila siguro is somewhere in the vicinity of 500 million. Kung i-across the board po natin, yung naging discount. Kasi across the board po yan nung pumasok sa SPAB.
Mr. Chair, with respect to these accounts, I believe...
No, Attorney Jong, the question is simple. Marami kayong accounts. Ginawa niyo 10 billion. Binenta niyo ng 3 billion. Sinlash nyo ng 70% ang lahat ng utang. Tama po ba?
The recovery under the bulk sale was around 42%.
So 42%. So 60% discount. So there was a gain. Kung ang dati kang utang, 100 piso, naging 60 pesos na lang. 40 pesos na lang.
But that's on the transfer to the...
I agree, Attorney Adjong. All I'm saying is, ang original utang sa inyo, 100 pesos. Ang kinita ninyo, 40 pesos na lang. Tama po ba?
On the bulk, Mr. Chair, but there was a specific price allocation.
No, Attorney Adjong, please do not confuse yourself. Yung 100 piso dapat kinolekta nyo yun. Pera nyo yun. Tama po?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, binenta nyo na lang ng 40 pesos. Tama po?
On the total bulk sale.
Yes, total
Mr.
bank sale. So lahat na nagka-utang, nagka-discount na 60%. Yung umutang mismo, well, assume na natin na yung one company had 100 pesos, binenta de 60% discount siya. Tama po ba?
But that's the discount on the PI transfer to the SPV,
Exactly.
Mr. Chair.
Exactly. So, what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, is this. Value judgment po yun. Hindi ko sinasabing illegal yun. Kasi lahat naman ng bangko dumaan po sa SPAV eh. Ang point ko lang, yung tinanong ko kanina about the collateral, bago pa pumasok na SPAV yan, eh walang collateral yan. Kaya wala din kayo makukolekta in the first place. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well noted. Next to interpolate is the Honorable John Ray Tiangco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations again on your appointment. Just a few questions. The loan from these companies, dahil malalaking kumpanya po ito, no? Usually, when they expand, they actually take a syndicated loan. Tama po ba? So itong mga utang po ba ng mga kumpanya to, mga ibang kumpanya, ay may umutang rin ba kasabay dun sa mga ibang bangko?
Yes, Mr. Chair, as contained in the position paper submitted to the committee, the Central CATV loan is a syndicated term loan, as well as the one granted to Buy and Tell. It's also a syndicated term loan along with other banks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So that's why I was asking, because gusto rin natin malaman yung performance or ay nangyari dun sa loans dun sa ibang bangko na private. Nabenta rin ba yung mga loans na to na hindi nabayaran sa mga SPAV? Sino kayang, I'm not sure if DBP can answer this. Kasi yung concern po natin, syempre, dahil government bank po yung DBP, naturally, dapat mas conservative po tayo. Kasi pera ng bayan po yan. And from my experience, pag nagpapaloan yung DBP, lalo na sa mga LGUs, kailangan yung collateral mo, halos sigurado. In fact, ang collateral mo dyan, yung IRA. So siguradong bayad yung DBP. So ano yung kino-compare po natin? Paano ba to? Yung hindi nabayaran sa DBP, ano nangyari dun sa mga loans rin dun sa 2 or 3 different banks with the same companies?
We regret, Your Honor, that we do not have information on the other banks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, maybe BSP?
At this point, Mr. Chair, we also do not have information, despite the fact that Attorney Adyong represents that it is a syndicated loan.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think this is very important because we have to find out kung kanina tinatanong po natin ano yung mga collateral na binigay sa DBP, hindi natin masagot. Ano naman yung collateral na binigay rin doon sa mga ibang bangko na yun? Kasi baka mas maganda yung collateral doon sa mga ibang bangko na yun kaysa dito sa loans po na to. So sa tingin ko, hindi ko lang paano natin makukuha yung information na yun, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Due process.
Think for would we know which banks are part of the syndicated loan?
Sir, Buy and Tell is a syndicated term loan with Metrobank, UCPB, Asian Bank.
Sorry, Metrobank?
UCPB, Asian Bank, China Bank, and Security Bank, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Based on our records.
Mr. Chair.
May we direct that you answer the queries on the next hearing of the Honorable Tiangco on the components of this syndicated loan on this transaction. May we direct DBP to be well versed next time?
Mr. Chair, we've already provided the other banks which are part of the syndicate on the loan of Buy and Tell as to how these loans were treated.
Honorable Tiangco, do you request that we to invite those banks?
Well, or if PSP has the
Can you make a motion
record,
to
yeah, I
invite?
move that we invite the other banks, part of the syndicate.
Second, Comsec, may we invite those banks as written who gave syndicated loans to the Lopez companies in the next hearing? Okay, Honorable Chanco, do you have any questions?
That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Before we move to the next interpellator, I'd like to clarify an issue earlier on the request of the subpoena duces tecum of the Honorable Defensor. We just followed the rule book of the House of Representatives that we give reasonable time and request formally the documents first before any subpoena is issued. So we did the right thing. We followed the rule book to request formally. We are now requesting formally, and we will email you after this hearing to DBP and to and the Lopez group most especially. We will
Yes.
send formal request, Honorable Defensor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree. Mr. Chairman, in the case of DBP, the COMSEC can bear me out. We have already written them, and in fact, there was a motion for them. So the subpoena duces tecum was already issued, well, at least by the committee, not yet signed by the Speaker. Yung po sa BSP at saka po yung iba pa, wala po talaga. But in the case of DBP, we have already exhausted all the processes.
But we agreed earlier that we will give them 1 month. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Deputy Speaker Lito Atienza, sir.
Thank you. Again, let me reiterate my position. Unless a case filed before this committee, or for that matter, any committee in Congress, does not carry any documents except an allegation, I would frown about it and reconsider whether we should even take it up or not. Otherwise, he may want to investigate allegations of anomalies during the Quirino time, even the magsaysay time, charges of anomalies in government. Kung wala tayong dalang dokumento at prueba, it's unfair for us to even prosecute or question or even insinuate wrongdoings on existing officers of these institutions because they had nothing to do with it. They don't even know anything about it. And in the meanwhile, we will be wasting very precious time of the 18th Congress. With that, I am not pursuing my position, but I made it very clear. If this committee hearing will not get any document from those who are alleging wrongdoing, not from the agencies, because that is fishing for evidence. I would call it as such. Kung wala po sila may papakita, in the next meetings, I will move for termination.
Well noted,
Thank you.
Honorable Deputy Speaker. Next to
Mr. Chair,
yes,
Mayor of BSP. If I
Attorney
may,
Cube.
yes, sir. Sir, if I may just clarify the statements I made earlier and which was summarized by Congressman Defensor. Sir, the subject of the discussion on the COE are 4 accounts. That's
Yes.
Maynilad, Benpres, CATV, and Bayantel. I mentioned earlier that we issued a COE for Bayantel,
Yes.
but for the rest there is none.
But is it legal to proceed without a COE?
Yes, sir. It appears that Attorney Adyong is claiming po that for purposes of tax incentives, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is illegal. Sir, with your indulgence, if I may continue, DBP is claiming that Central CATV and Philhome Cable, Philippine Home Cable, are one and the same. Then that would be perhaps one of the things that we will go back to.
Yes.
Because if based on the representation, they are one and the same, we have to look back to the COE that we have issued, if there is indeed a COE for Philippine Home
Okay,
Cable.
please do before
Yes,
the
po.
next hearing. Thank you,
Yes, po.
Attorney Cube. Next to ask is the Honorable MCAS. But before he proceeds, we'd like to acknowledge the presence of Representative and Deputy Majority Leader Tyrone Nagabas. So, Representative MCAS, please proceed with your interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Good morning to everyone. I would like to direct my questions to DBP. Under the Special Purpose Vehicle Act, financial institution may condone or write off non-performing assets for liquidity creations. how are non-performing assets determined and classified as against performing assets?
Mr. Chair, the law defines the term non-performing assets, and the term refers to accounts that have remained unpaid for at least 180 days from the time they became past due or any of the events of default has occurred, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Who determines and authorizes the writing off of non-performing loans? In this case, who authorized and executed the condonation of 1.6 billion?
Mr. Chair, if we may repeat our position, there was no write-off nor condonation. What happened was a transfer or sale of accounts made to Philippine Investment 1 and Philippine Investment 2, Mr. Chair. So there was no write-off, Mr. Chair. With respect to eligibility to the benefits and the tax incentives and privileges under the SPV Act, the BSP is required to issue certificates of eligibility, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. I'm now clarified.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Honorable Chanco, if I may just quickly interject, please proceed. Yes. Attorney Jong, I'm reading now the law of the SPV. This is the RA 9182. Ang klaro po dito sa batas that the regulatory agency shall issue a certificate of eligibility bago nyo matransfer the FI or the financial institution, kailangan ko may clearance ng regulatory body, in this particular case, BSP. Klarong-klaro, if I may read the exact provision of this law, transfer of assets to SPV. The transfer of NPAs, non-performing assets, from an FI, this is section 12B, to an SPV shall be subject to prior certification of eligibility as NPA by the appropriate regulatory authority having jurisdiction over its operations. In this case, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So, I'm sorry, Attorney Jong, hindi nyo po ito kasalanan, pero you're the legal. Parang sinasabi nyo, pwede.
If I may explain, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, please.
In order for a financial institution to avail of the benefits under the SPV law, an account that is transferred should be covered by a certificate of eligibility issued by the BSP. However, financial institutions like DBP under the law may still transfer credits and receivables to other entities, but this time without the benefit that the tax incentives and privileges under the SPV law. And to do that, Mr. Chair, we do not have to get a certificate.
No. Attorney Jong, sorry for this. Kasi ang sinasabi nito, from the institution to the SPAV. Di po ba? So yes, the SPAV law is the basis, 9182. Di ba? Kundi, ang sinasabi mo kasi sa akin, pwede kayong mag-firehouse sale. Pwede kayong magbenta at any time. Ito nga po yung SPAV Bago nyo ipinasok sa SPAV, dun sa Special Purpose Vehicle, dapat nagkaroon kayo ng Certificate of Eligibility. Whether you avail, walang sinabi dito na qualification. Bago ka mag-transfer, sabi niya, the regulatory agency should approve it first.
Yes, sir. But the asset sale and purchase agreement executed between DBP and Lehman Brothers included other accounts not SPV eligible. And our basis for that, Mr. Chair, would be the Civil Code, which allows assignments of receivables.
No. Attorney Jong,
yes,
rewind tayo. Ginawa lang yung SPAV law in 2000, 2. So doon ka lang pwedeng pumunta sa SPAV, di po ba?
Yes, sir. But we can, the bank and other financial institutions may still transfer receivables po, even without the benefit of the tax incentives under the SPAV Act. Sir, in other words, there are two types of accounts transferred. One are those SPV eligible, covered by COE from the BSP, and then another type of account transferred are those non-eligible. Wala pong COE.
Any given time, pwede ka magpunta sa BSP for even the non-SPAV. You have to inform the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas for the asset sale.
No, Mr. Chair, we do not have to get clearance from the BSP to transfer assets.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, you were out earlier. But I was just saying on the provision of the SPAV law na any transfer should have a certificate of eligibility. In this case, wala po nga po yung mga binanggit kong agencies. Ang assertion ni Atty. Adjong, hindi pwede naman kasi hindi naman namin kukunin yung mga exemptions. Pero sabi ko, at some point, kailangan may approval pa rin ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas because that is, in fact, in our particular case, assets of the Philippine government. Hindi lang po yun kasi Bangko Financial Institution po yan na pag-aari ng gobyerno. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify.
Yes, let's for further discussion on the next hearing.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Ebcas, any follow-up? Representative Ebcas. And tapos na siya. Representative Joe Jimenez for the second round.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just to perhaps take off where Kong Defensor started. I'd like to get the position of the BSP, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Mr. Chairman, as to the statement made just earlier by the lady, by Atty. Adjong, that there is no need for a clearance by from the BSP on transactions where SPB law is not applicable. May we get the opinion of the Bangko Sentral on the matter, Mr. Chair?
Attorney Cube, please respond.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if I may just go back a bit on the procedure, the bank or the applicant bank must give us a master list of all the NPAs they would like to enroll for the issuance of a COE of the BSP, by the BSP. And so based on that master list, we check on the eligibility if it has complied with that of the SPB Act 2002. Now, I think the question, all the eligible NPAs must be issued a COE or must be covered by a COE because that is what the SPV Act says.
Thank you, Attorney.
Mr. Chair, if I may continue.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Attorney Adjong.
No, Mr. Chair, we do not need BSP approval.
So, which law are you using?
It's the Civil Code, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
which allows assignments of credits and other incorporeal rights, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, may we get to know the opinion of BSP? Kung required ho ba ang approval nila? Kasi to say that this is covered by the Civil Code, I have my may mga duda po ako doon, with all due respect. Kung sabihin natin to cite the Civil Code, a very broad law na sabihin natin applicable sa situation natin.
Prior approval of the BSP for the issuance of the eligibility. Unfortunately, the provision that was read by Congressman Defensor does not point to whether it becomes eligible or not for tax incentive. It was the statement of or the provision of the SPV Act is quite absolute, and it was not distinguishing whether if there is no COE, it will not become eligible for tax incentive or otherwise.
Noted.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
aside from the tax na pinag-uusapan natin dito po, hindi po talaga sinasagot din ng BSP. Ang tanong ko po, which I will insist, if they're not covered by SPB, kailangan po rin pa ba ng permission ng BSP? I believe there should be a role in this situation. May function ho ang BSP dito. That's very clear to all of us. And kung sabihin natin na kung SPB covered, kailangan ng BSP approval. Kung hindi siya covered by SPB law, is it still required na may approval ng BSP? Hindi po natin sinasagot po yun.
Sir, those NPAs that are being enrolled by financial institutions must be covered by a COE. That is what the SPV access po.
Kaya nga po, ma'am, with due respect, malinaw ho sa atin, if it is covered by SPB law, malinaw po yung proseso. But in some transactions po dito na nangyari, hindi po siya covered ng SPB as claimed by Attorney Adjong, if I'm not mistaken. So, kung hindi siya covered ng SPB, sinasabi ni Attorney Adjong covered siya by the Civil Code. Which para sa akin, sabi nyo nga, may ibang batas naman na covered governing po sa mga transaction na yun. So ano po yun? Pwede ba natin sabihin sa publiko na itong transaction na to, walang kinalaman ng Bangko Sentral kung hindi siya covered ng SPB? Is that the case po? I will end that po.
Representative Jimenez, I think that since Ms. Cube is not a lawyer, we should invite the legal department of the BSP next hearing to give the official legal viewpoint or stand of the BSP. Is that okay with you?
Yes, yes, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to end, siguro alam naman ng mga kasama natin sa committee na to, Republic Act 9182, siguro pwede natin sabihin napaka-distinct ng law na ito kasi kasama sa batas na ito yung provision on hinahanap ko lang po. Section 27 po. To me, this is very unique. On Section 27 of the SPB law, sinasabi dito, conscience clause. This is very unique. Nothing in this act shall be construed to condone or exempt from any liability any person responsible for acts or omissions constituting unsound business practices or mismanagement. I will end with that statement, Mr. Chairman. Thank you po. Salamat.
Thank you, Representative Jimenez. Before we end, I'd like to ask questions to the President of DBP, Herbosa. Mr. Herbosa, are you online?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Maraming salamat po.
Let me have, I have 5 questions to ask you as the President now, in line with what is presently happening with the DBP. What are the functions of DBP as stated in its charter? Sir.
Development Bank of the Philippines is really an infrastructure bank that reaches out to supplements for national government, no? Financial inclusion is very important. Job generation for projects, that's very important to industrial development. We also have a portfolio of corporate borrowers, and these are usually mostly in utilities. At this time, ever since I took over, maybe almost I'm on my 3rd year at DBP, we've been emphasizing our role in economic stimulus po. So aside from the mandate of BPP since before, it started as a rehabilitation bank. It has developed into a bank supporting infrastructure. And now I'm leading DBP into financial outreach po, because we are now addressing the large unbanked population of this country. And in the stimulus program of the government, we think that it's very important for us to to support sustainable energy, waste management, proper sewage, food security po. That's why we're also into farm to market, so that we will be able to support those primary producers that will give us the food that we need and hopefully lead us to an export strategy. Yun po ang DBP, how it started, and how in my 3 years here, I would envision to grow to become more meaningful to our country. The corporate borrowers that we lend to right now are mostly into energy development po, sustainable projects that is very meaningful, the economic stimulus that we're leading into 2022 and beyond.
Thank you po. Were there any cases in the past, in your tenure, wherein the DBP has failed in its mandate, or miski hindi in your tenure po? Do you have any recollection of any time in the history of DBP that DBP has failed in its mandate?
Well, I've been a banker all these 40 years, and most of that was in the private sector with Bank of the Philippine Islands. And ever since I have held DBP in highest esteem and respect. You know, let's just put it this way. If DBP was not judicious in its credit offering, there won't be any DBP now. Because DBP actually takes a lot more risk than the private sector banks.
Okay,
We are supposed to be spearheading economic development, especially at this time when there are a lot of companies that need to be rehabilitated and restructured. Then you would expect DBP to take on even more risk. That's the reason why when I was in the private sector, I have all the respect for DBP and even Land Bank, because they're threading into areas that private sector lenders won't even dare risk.
Thank
by lending
you,
money.
Sir Bosa. Presently, what's the rank of DBP in terms of assets ranking in the banking industry?
Yeah. Well, we're very fortunate. I think we'll be happy to let you know ahead of the official news that DBP has gone up to number 7 among the top 10 banks. I'm very happy that we're able to historically achieve a 1 trillion peso asset base. When I took over, DBP was usually traditionally at number 9 or number 10. And this shows us how well we're doing, the robust growth. And I'd like also to say that that's also a trajectory from what we have done in the past. Of course, there will be loans that cannot be paid for very good reason. But as I said again, that the growth of DBP is testimony that we are standing the test of times.
Okay,
especially at the time of the 2006 crisis.
Thank you po. On May 3, 2020, the Department of Finance reported that DBP showed more exposure to non-performing loans as compared to other leading banks. What is your response towards this statement of the DOF?
Of course, as I mentioned, we're expected to do a lot more risks, especially now in a pandemic situation. You've seen the reports of I guess the BSP and other publication that banks are going to be very, very careful about lending at this time when liquidity is needed the most. So I would say DOF statement is correct. Land Bank and DBP, being government financial institutions, we have to lead the charge to revitalize this economy, to make it progressive. Kaya nga po, dalawa yung ang ano namin by law, dalawa yung programa namin. Yung tinatawag naming response, which is to rehabilitate people that need liquidity. And we also have the Ascenso, which I think the LGUs appreciate, because these are for projects, new projects that will enable their respective communities to prosper with interest rate subsidies pa po yan. That's what makes me very excited leading DBP at this point in time. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Yes,
Yes, just a quick question, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Bosa. First, Mr. Bosa, I'd like to congratulate you. Alam ko po, maganda talaga inyong palakad dyan. Tanong ko lang po sa inyong 3 taon na nandiyan sa DBP, Mr. Bosa, nagbigay po ba kayo ng mga loans na walang collateral mula sa inyong bangko?
Saan po?
Years.
Opo. Totoo po yun. Honorable Mike, nangyayari po yun kasi marami ho dyan mga character loans. And I've said that the 5 C's of credit po ito, character, capacity, collateral, condition of the business, at saka yung condition, the industry that you're in. But the most important one is character, C. Kaya nga po, it's possible that as much as we want to have collateral, nangyayari po talaga hindi 100% collateralized po ito because the merits of the credit is on the project viability and the cash flows that we believe will happen.
So, Mr. Chairman, dito po sa panahon nyo, meron po nangyaring ganyan po?
Saan po? Sa BPI?
In your 3 years. Sa inyo in 3 years po. Wala po ganyan. Yes,
wala po. Wala po. Awan ng Diyos. Wala po. Because we really...
Dahil bilib po ako sa inyong track record sa private sector. Pero doon po nakaraan, nangyari po ba sa DBP na nagkaroon ng loan? Sabi niyo pa, opo. Di ba ho dapat nagkakaroon ng joint and solidary signature to ensure that the loan is protected?
Definitely. That's a good question po, Honorable Mike.
Thank you, Mr.
Importante sa amin yung JSS.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bosa. At ako po ay naniniwala, kiniklear ko lang po ulit sa committee, hindi po ninyo panahon nung nangyari ito, and naniniwala ako sa leadership ng DBP sa ngayon. At naniniwala po ako na malilinaw natin to, Mr. Chairman, yung mga kinaklarong points. Attorney Jong, please clarify your statement on the SPAB kasi ito pong mga assets na ito pumasok talaga sa SPAB eh. So, tama po si Ms. Cube. It has to be cleared. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next. Yes. Yes, Mr.
Chairman.
Yes, I have.
I would like to say something which is very relevant to the query of Honorable Mike Defensor.
Proceed.
The limitation we've got here is that this has happened about almost 20 years ago. So all of those who gave the authority are not with us, unfortunately, anymore. So what I can assure you is the next set of documents would be our board resolution po. I hope that satisfies Honorable Mike. We'll dig up the relevant board resolution. Kasi laman po nyo, when this happened, the chairman was Mr. Alindogan, and of course, just recently deceased, President Ray David po. But we'll do our best, sir, to lend clarity to this.
Thank you, President Arbosa. Next, I'd like to ask, how is the bank dealing with non-performing assets such as loans that default in this time?
We have our credit provisioning policies po. And if, let's say, example only, kung clean loan yan, if it does not pay interest in, I think, 3 or 4 quarters, kung halimbawa nyo quarterly interest payment yan, may red flag na po yan. And I'd like to say this on behalf of the DOF, that considering the challenges that we have facing us, the government financial institutions have a meeting on what we call loan provisionings and possible bad loans with the Secretary himself. In fact, sa Friday nga po, meron na naman kaming regular meeting where Land Bank will be there and UCPB, which will be part of Land Bank, and us, and we're monitoring all of this. Kasi ano yun talaga, lalo nga kami sa GFI, taxpayers money po ito eh.
Yes, sir.
Hindi naman po namin sa mga depositor yan, hindi gaya ng private sector banks. This is people's money. So we're really monitoring this as best as we can every month together with the Secretary of Finance. And I think that's a very, very good practice that I don't think we've had at the DBP of the past.
Okay, thank you. My last question is, what is DBP's understanding of a BHS loan?
You know, a BS loan is something that will not be paid.
To your knowledge, has the DBP ever been accused or of providing BHS loan?
Meron pong ganyan mga allegation na ko nababasa po.
So since you have access now to the documents based on your of that nababasa nyo, do you confirm na may ganyan nangyari dyan sa bank nyo? Even beyond your time?
I have not gone through the files, but what I do recall, there were some allegations. But you know, for me, that's the past. I want to go ahead.
I'm not saying the alleged lang to alleged. How about other companies like I don't know, nababasa-basa ko rin to, like Felix before, or companies under Mr. Ongpin? Have you read of that?
Yes, I've read about that. I've read about that.
Okay.
I cannot comment beyond that.
Do we have your commitment that DBP will, as you said, yung BHS laws, yung tingin hindi mo na mababayaran, pinapautang mo pa rin. That's what you told the committee. Do we have your commitment that you will exercise your powers that this will not happen again?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And in fact, I'm happy to report to you po that when I stepped in with the help of the board of the DBP po, we have instituted a very strict governance program. Kaya po isang director dyan, nakatutok dyan. So hindi po ako yan ha. Yung director po, it's a board committee on governance. Ang nakatutok po yan. So it also monitoring me. It's keeping me honest. Hindi ako kasali dyan. So which for me, I'm very, very happy. Because in that case, if there will be any BHS loan sponsor, marami ho siyang dadaanan. Involved na yan ang board.
Thank you, sir. Before we end, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Representative Don Gonzales and Deputy Majority Leader, Assistant Majority Leader Onyx Crisologo. So may I remind the resource persons to comply with the requested submission by our members and to take note of the suggestions, recommendations of the members. We will follow up on these matters through our committee secretariat. And before we end also, I'd like to thank you for your time. Yes. Ano po palang manifestation si Minority Leader Caraps Paduano. Sir, Minority Leader, are you on Zoom?
Yes, Mr.
Are
Chairman.
you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, though this House resolution emanates from the investigation on the franchise application of ABS-CBN, Mr. Chairman, I would like to, since the transaction, Mr. Chairman, involved not only the 1.66 billion or 17% of the loans incurred by the Lopez corporations, Mr. Chairman. Might as well, Mr. Chairman, if the author and the chair will allow that in the next hearing, Mr. Chairman, we will invite not all, but major corporations which is involved in this 9.55 billion transaction, Mr. Chairman. Because I have said it is only 17% of the total transaction incurred by the Lopez group of companies, Mr. Chairman, so that they can shed light and inform this committee, and even we're so happy if they can also provide us documents that will shed light on the issue, Mr. Chairman. Now, second, Mr. Chairman, since the SPB SPV bill or law, Mr. Chairman. Under SPV Rule 12, Mr. Chairman. Allow me to read, Mr. Chairman. It's about the BIR, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, under SPV Rule 12C, Mr. Chairman, issuance of COC, pursuant to SPV Rule 15A, the appropriate regulatory authority in which this the BSP in this matter, Mr. Chairman, shall issue to the borrower if I individual or SPV as COE within 45 days from the date of application. Said COE shall always be required by the BIR for purposes of availing the tax exemptions and other privileges under the Act. The appropriate regulatory authority shall furnish the Commission and the BIR a duplicate copy of the said COE subject to the conditions stated in the above paragraph. The appropriate regulatory authority in which this is the BSP and the BIR shall coordinate to ensure the integrity of the COE. Mr. Chairman, if again the chair will allow, we may invite the BIR, Mr. Chairman, at the next hearing, so that they can shed light on the issue.
So can you put that into a motion?
Yeah, that's why, Mr. Chairman, I move to invite all others, BIR and all other corporations involved in this 9.56 billion, Mr. Chairman, because I have said it is not only
Mr. Minority Leader, can I make a suggestion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I was informed that those availing of loans that were sold to the SPAB are 2,000 companies. Can we just invite the top 5?
Yeah. That's why I have said, Mr. Chairman, it's only the major corporation, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. I approve that to direct the committee secretariat to invite the top 5 based on the list provided by DBP who also had non-performing loans sold to the SPAP, and to direct the COMSEC to invite the BIR.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be reserved on the next hearing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Minority Leader. Before we end, may we have a short manifestation from Attorney Adyong?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just to clarify the answer of the BSP on whether DBP may transfer all rights and all credits and other incorporeal rights, we submit, Mr. Chair, that the transaction was reviewed by the Commission on Audit and there was no negative finding.
Yes.
Likewise, these transactions were part of the examination conducted regularly by the BSP, and there was likewise no negative finding, Mr. Chair.
Noted.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick ano lang, kasi si Attorney Jong binabanggit niya, legal daw yung magbenta sila kahit walang approval ng BSP. Attorney Jong, your question. Ang loan 100 pesos, tama? Pag binenta mo ng 150, walang problema yon. Pag binenta mo ng 100 pesos, walang problema yon. Tama po?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ngayon, yung loan na 100 pesos, binenta mo ng 40 pesos. May mga officials ngayon dyan sa DBP na nag-commit ng graft and corruption because you did not go through the SPV process. Kung binenta nyo ng mas mababa, ibig sabihin nagkaroon kayo ng fire sale. So what I'm saying is, ang point kasi ni Ms. Cube, yung act in itself, nilagay nyo naman sa SPV eh. So by putting it in the SPV, governed kayo by the SPV law. Ngayon, kung ang sinasabi mo ngayon eh, hindi namin kailangan gumawa sa SPV, binenta nyo ng mura, may graft and corruption kayo dahil sa book value ninyo. And I was in Pag-ibig before, we cannot sell below the book value. And that is your book value. Including the interest, the loans, and so on and so forth. But if you go through SPV, bumaba kayo, nagka-discount, okay yan. Walang problema yan. Diniscount ninyo. Tama, Atty. Jong?
Mr. Chair, we are not limited to the provision of the SPV.
Agree. So therefore, yung binenta yung 40% na discounted, yung mga loans na yun na 1.6 billion or the 9 billion, selling at 3 billion, lahat ng nag-approve nun, ang legal na nag-approve yun, lahat kayo is liable for graft and corruption because the book value of what you have, you cannot sell lower. And you know that under the law. Is that not correct, Attorney Jong?
Mr. Chair, each account was given a purchase price allocation.
Under the SPV law.
No, sir.
But you have a book value of those loans. You cannot tell now, President Terbosa, na sir, itong non-performing loans natin na 5 billion, pwede natin ibenta ng 1 billion. Because the book value governs you. You cannot sell lower than that. If you sell lower than that, you're committing graft and corruption. And that is what you have committed in that process that you sold it at a lower cost without the eligibility, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to say, Attorney Jong, check what you have there under our processes. We are governed more strictly as government financial institutions rather than the private. Mas mahirap po sa atin yan. At kung hindi yan dumaan sa SPV law, nagbenta kayo graft and corruption. At kung yan din sa SPV law, hindi nyo yan binigyan ng eligibility, nag-commit kayo ng graft and corruption. I'm sorry to say, Mr. Chair. And maybe next time, the BSP legal should be here to clarify these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. As requested earlier, we request a legal briefing on this issue. So before we end, is there any motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to adjourn.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
As there are no other matters for discussion, the meeting is now adjourned. Maraming salamat sa aking mga kasama sa committee at sa ating panuhin sa inyong suporta at kooperasyon sa mga gawain ng Kongreso.
Subscribe to SMNI News Channel and turn on notification button for more news updates.